Okay?
Yeah.
Yes,
Sort of
there
just,
isn't anywhere good inside,
Yeah.
believe me, or we'd be there.
and I'm taking up the full 15 minutes too, by the way. Okay, the Battle of Plataea was fought here on this broad plain in the year 479 BC. It was to be the last pitched battle of the Greco-Persian War fought on Greek soil. For this, battle has been talked about by Herodotus as well as other historians such as Ephorus and Herodotus. However, I'm mostly focusing on Herodotus' account as well as other sources. Key features of the area include the Esopus and Oiro rivers. Oiro rivers, sorry, the Esopus way over there, the Oiro down here. Mount Kithaeron, here obviously. The Gargathian Spring and the overall flatness of the field with a few ridges dotting it. These features played an important role as they served to help or hinder the abilities of each side to attack, defend or supply, depending on each army's own particular strategies and troop types. The events leading up to the battle were as follows. Following the setback at Thermopylae and the naval defeat at Salamis, the Persian king Xerxes retired from Greece, likely fearing the demonstrable threat of rebellion in his empire if he was too long absent from the ongoing game of whack-a-mole that characterized Persian domestic policy. In his stead, he left his commander Mardonius in charge in Greece, occupying Athens before having to leave the city to winter his forces in Thessaly, allowing Athenian forces to return. Mardonius offered Athens a peace deal, using Alexander I of Macedon as an intermediary. The Persians would rebuild their city in exchange for an allegiance. This offer Athens refused. With this, Mardonius marched his forces on Athens, at which point the Athenians evacuated the city to Salamis prior to its capture. Herodotus claims that the Athenians were forced to take this action because the Spartans did not send their army north to assist them as they promised they would in the event of a Persian advance. However, an inscription discovered in the 20th century known as the Themistocles Decree enumerates a coordinated and planned evacuation of the city that Mardonius would be drawn into Athens so that the Athenians could focus on a naval confrontation with Persia. Incidentally, the inscription's authenticity has been debated. Nevertheless, Herodotus goes on to claim that after the evacuation, Athens sent diplomats to Sparta, informing them that Athens had refused the peace offer because there were no traitors to Greece. But if Spartans' inaction continued, that they may be forced to make an accommodation with Persia nonetheless. Until now, the region of Attica was an effective buffer zone between Persian forces and the isthmus north of Peloponnese. Spartans realized that without Athens they would eventually be overrun. No navy to help them, no matter how well they defended the isthmus. And so the ephors decided to send a force of Spartan hoplites north with 7 helots per man to face Mardonius. Upon hearing of this, Mardonius marched his forces out of Athens to meet them, but not before burning the city as he left and systematically reducing every possible building and temple that he could to a heap of smouldering rubble. It is worth noting here the difficulty of multilateral Greek cooperation. Unlike the Persian Empire, which could simply command its geographically disparate subjects to line up behind a common goal, Greece was in no way a unified state. It was rather a hodgepodge of independent city-states with a long history of quarreling with each other. The only means of cooperation was a shared interest, and much time, resources, and ground could be lost before it was recognized. As for the forces assembled here at Plataea, it cannot be stressed enough how different they were to each other, both in equipment and doctrine. If a Greek or Persian from the 5th century were to see modern infantry from Greece and Iran, I personally doubt they would be able to discern any difference. Modern infantry is all but identical worldwide in terms of equipment and doctrine, the only major variable being quality. Here at Plataea in 479 BC, however, the differences were huge. On the Greek side, the main body of the force were hoplites, men equipped with a large round shield and spear, organised into phalanxes, each containing many men in serried ranks, forming row after row of shields and spear points, working, at least in theory, as a single organism that would seek out a direct clash with the enemy in order to bring the battle to a decisive conclusion. Hoplite armour was still very cumbersome at this time, composed of greaves, cuirass, helmet, and top shield, all designed for protection rather than mobility. Besides the hoplites, the Greeks had a mass of assorted light troops, likely skirmishers. It is usually assumed that the aforementioned helots made up a large part of this force. However, uncertainty of this has been expressed more recently, with some arguing that they served as camp attendants for the Spartans and little more. The The size of this Greek force is hard to determine. Herodotus claims a force of about 110,000, including just under 40,000 hoplites, from a laundry list of Greek city-states, with Athens and Sparta sending the largest contingents. Suffice to say that most modern scholars deem these numbers as widely inflated. However, it is undisputed that at this time this was the largest force of hoplites ever assembled. This mass of men was put under the command of the Spartan Pausanias, who I will henceforth refer to as General Pausanias, in order to distinguish him from the 2nd century AD author whose extensive compilation of inane musings we have been busying ourselves with these last 3 weeks. On the Persian side, led by Mardonius, was a wide variety of units, including heavy and light infantry and a large number of archers. But the biggest threat to the Greeks was the Persian cavalry. This included heavy cavalry, which could easily be used to outflank enemy infantry. Cavalry archers, who with their speed and range could harass enemy units with virtual impunity, as well as Mardonius himself with his elite bodyguard of horsemen. The Persian forces were drawn from all corners of their vast empire, with troops as culturally disparate as Egyptians and Assyrians. However, the backbone of the force were the Persians and Medes. There were, however, a large portion of Greeks fighting for the Persians as well, most notably Thebes. Altogether, Herodotus claims this force to be 300,000 strong, including 50,000 Greeks. As with the Greek forces, however, these numbers are also seen as inflated by modern scholars. The key Persian strategy, far from the open clash of heavy arms, was to strike and invade continually, preferably at a distance, a strategy that was amenable to the wide open plains of the Middle East. As a result, they were equipped for mobility, lightly armed and armoured, with even their heaviest infantry carrying shields of wicker, not bronze, and significantly shorter spears. Initially, the two armies faced off across the plain. The Persians lined up behind the Euphrates River, having built a fortified camp nearby. The Greeks faced them from the lower slopes of Mount Ketharon, with the Athenians occupying the left wing, the Spartans and Tegeans on the right, and the rest of the Greeks forming up the centre. Knowing their already fractious nature, Mardonius initially attempted to break them apart by way of diplomacy. When this failed, he sent in his heavy cavalry across the wide, flat plain that so favoured it. They hit the Greeks hard, with the Bulgarians suffering the worst. A force of Athenians with an accompanying archer regiment came to their aid. Herodotus recounts how the Persian cavalry commander Lycistus had his horse shot from under him, leaving him to be killed on the ground after putting up a long, bitter struggle. Upon learning of their commander's death, the Persian cavalry tried to recover his body, but in vain, losing many men in the attempt, eventually giving up and retreating after heavy losses. Besides its failure, this attack evidently served only to polarize the once fractious Greeks into a shared struggle. On top of this, Greek morale soared as Lycistus' body, still clad in his beautifully gilded scaled armor, was propped up and paraded up and down the Greek lines. Despite the success, General Pausanias decided to move his forces, now occupying a ridge opposite the Esopus, which allowed better water access, with the Gargaffian spring nearby. Unfortunately, however, in this new position, the Persians were able to cut behind them with cavalry intercepting Greek fern convoys, as well as harassing them with cavalry archers by day, and eventually even managing to block the spring, the Greeks' main water source. After many days of this, General Pausanias decided to retreat his forces under cover of night and occupy a strip of land between two streams of the Oira River at the foot of Mount Ketharon, where they might be better defended, supplied, and with water readily available. The move was made with the retreat continuing past the night well into the daytime, at which point they had to continue marching under the continued fire of cavalry archers. The central assortment of Greeks ended up fleeing to the temple of Hera, near the city of Plataea, leaving the Athenian left and the Spartan right wings both stranded and divided. The temple to which the centre fled has now been identified, the excavated remains matching Herodotus' description. Mardonius, who with great effort had tried in vain to divide the Greeks and make them leave the field, now looked upon a Greek force that was divided and in flight, all of their own disorder. Seeing an opportunity, he sent his forces in to attack. Despite the many days of each side trying to out-strategize the other, the battle was now reduced to a blunder met with expedience. However, it would be anachronistic to criticize the Greeks for the mess their foundations found themselves in. Military historian Gwen Dyer has stated that arranging and deploying hoplites was extremely difficult at the best of times, with communication and coordination being key. with such unprecedented numbers on the fields, mistakes were bound to occur. The attack began with the Spartans and Tegeans on the right being attacked by the Persians, including heavy infantry, archers and cavalry, including Mardonius and his own bodyguard. A large group of archers formed up as a block, firing from behind a barricade of men, holding body-length wicker shields, a cross-section of which you can see on the handout. The Spartans sent a messenger to the Athenians requesting help, but before they could, the Athenians found themselves under attack by Theban infantry, pinned down in a bitter struggle of phalanx against phalanx. The Spartans and Tegeans managed to close with the Persian infantry. With any thought of strategy now discarded, they now sought only to push doggedly forward until victory was achieved. The Greeks had to fight hard to bring down the barricade of shields protecting the archers. But once broken through, the archers proved little threat at close quarters. Men trained and equipped for ranged attack could do little else but reach out with their bare hands in a desperate attempt to break the oncoming Greek spear shafts as they were helplessly hacked, bashed, and skewered to death. Even the Persian heavy infantry didn't fare much better. Though they were brave, according to Herodotus, their inferior equipment all but ensured their deaths. Their wicker shields, while stronger than bread baskets, and fine for deflecting arrows and stones, offered little resistance against the spear thrusts and sword slashes of a Greek hoplite propelled forward by adrenaline and contempt. Mardonius himself, in the thick of battle with his bodyguard, was also struck down and killed, allegedly by a rock to the head. Now leaderless, the Persian forces fled to their fortified camp with the Spartans and Tegeans hot on their heels. The Athenians had by now managed to push through the Theban attack, themselves now heading for the Persian camp as well. Upon seeing this rout, the allied Greeks, who had previously fled to the temple of Hera, also followed suit. There was at first a long struggle at the palisade wall of the camp, but once they broke through, the Greeks inflicted a wholesale slaughter on the camp's inhabitants, of whom only a handful were left alive. The day was won. In the aftermath, Herodotus tells us that the Helots were ordered to gather all the valuable loot in the camp, of which there was a great volume and variety, attesting to Persian excess. Herodotus goes on with the story of General Pausanias ordering Mardonius' servants to cook a typical Persian meal, and his own servants to cook a Spartan meal and had them put side by side. The Persian one looking exquisite, the Spartan plain. Showing the victory of Greek austerity over Persian decadence, he proclaimed, "Men of Greece, I asked you here in order to show you the folly of the Persians, who living in this style came to Greece to rob us of our poverty." Personally, I don't buy this story. It's far too perfect and smacks of narrative. Nevertheless, like all narrative, it is telling in its telling. After the battle, the Greek dead were buried at the battlefield with different mounds for different cities. The Persian allied city of Thebes surrendered to allied forces after a short siege, its chief Persian collaborators taken away to be executed. With the naval battle of Mycale occurring at around the same time as Plataea, the Persians were now fully defeated on land and sea, while rebellion elsewhere in the empire meant King Xerxes would be too preoccupied to ever return. As for the lasting legacy of Plataea, Pausanias, the 2nd century writer, mentions the battle graves being still visible, and Thucydides mentions the locals bringing offerings to graves in the latter 5th century BC. Pausanias also mentions monuments to the battle, a trophy 2 miles from the city, and a portrait of a Plataean commander inside a temple of Athena. There was also a victory monument dedicated at Delphi in the form of a serpent column, for victory for the entire war, not just Plataea, which is inscribed with the names of 31 Greek cities who participated in the conflict. Though the base of the column is still visible at Delphi, the monument itself was moved to Constantinople, now Istanbul, in the 4th century AD, where it remains to this day. This final blow, pushing Persia out of Greece proper, served to polarize Greek identity. The battle itself became more mythologized over time. Ephorus, writing in the 4th century BC, shows the Greeks as a wholly unified force. And centuries later, Diodorus Siculus doesn't even distinguish between different Greek states, casting them simply as the Greeks, and having them confidently initiate the battle, rather than constantly receiving and resisting attack, as written by Herodotus, writing much closer to the event. We see here a growing trend of portraying the Greeks as a unified and aggressive